So happy to have back on. It's been too long. Our friend Glenn Kirschner, former 30-year federal prosecutor, served in the U.S. Army in JAG Corps. You see him nonstop on MSNBC, NBC, other places. Hope he's also have an amazing YouTube channel, Justice Matters with Glenn Kirschner. Glenn, I learned a lot from you, so I'm glad you're here. I just look at my notes. I think it's been like a month and a half or 2 months since you've been on, so I'm so glad you're here.
Too long, Dean, too long.
So a lot to cover. Now, we cover legal stuff. This is a political issue, but it's really not because it transcends politics. It's Donald Trump yesterday on Fox News saying he's going to be a day one dictator. This is rare. And by the way, I just wrote an article about it. Sean Hannity didn't raise the word dictator. That came out of Trump's mouth. He just said abuse power, and Trump went to dictator on his own. What is your reaction to this man saying this in light of his history of being charged with numerous felonies for attempting a coup to overturn our election?
You know, Dean, rarely do I believe anything Donald Trump said. I believe that. I mean, he was an aspiring dictator last time. And why would we think he would do anything but continue in his dictatorial ways? So listen, everybody's got to rise up and make sure you get to the polls and numbers too big to rig and too real to steal, and make sure that doesn't happen. I don't believe it will happen. I cannot envision Donald Trump attracting a single new supporter to his cause since he tried to end our democracy on January 6, 2020. So, you know, I'm not complacent. You know, we're going to be out there fighting like hell every day, or we won't have a country anymore. And the way we're going to do it is by going to the polls.
And, you know, Liz Cheney had a really great line. She said she believes America is, quote, sleepwalking into a dictatorship. And that's my concern. Like me, you, everyone listening to this show, listening to Steph's show, other shows, we're all in it. We get it. It's the average person who's not following politics now. It's not a presidential election year. They're like, oh, Trump, yeah, they like him or don't like him, whatever. And they go Biden versus Trump. They think about policy or who they like better without really getting the threat this guy faces, the potential risks to our nation. Look, what do we do? I mean, that's my biggest thing. It's everyone who's informed knows what's going on. It's the others who don't, just not paying attention right now.
Yeah, the way I've been putting it is we're slouching toward the end of our republic if we let it happen, right? It's a republic if you can keep it. So here's the good news. And I'm always looking for that little bit of silver lining behind the big, dark orange cloud. All indicators, Dean, are that Donald Trump's federal criminal trial for trying to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election will commence on March 4. We just saw that the juror questionnaires went out to the DC residents. Those questionnaires didn't have the name of the case on them, but it said, we will be bringing you in on February 9 to have you fill out these questionnaires. Well, coincidentally, February 9 was the date that Judge Chutkan announced the Trump case jurors will be brought in. So listen, that trial is full speed ahead. The only way it could pause or temporarily be stayed is if the Supreme Court decided to accept review of one of these absurd issues that Judge Chutkan just rejected, absolute immunity or double jeopardy. I will predict, now, I'm not a betting man. I'm not a high roller. $1 is my betting limit. I'll put the full buck, Dean, on the Supreme Court not accepting review of either issue. That is the one thing that could put a temporary stop to the March 4 trial date. I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, this Supreme Court, regardless of the fact that Trump appointed 3 of them, it's more Clarence Thomas and Alito that you have to be concerned about when it actually comes to the rule of law and the institutions. On political issues, I disagree vehemently with Gorsuch and Barrett and Kavanaugh. But when it comes to these kind of institutional issues, to be blunt, they've been fairly good on it. So I think they would uphold. And I think if this court doesn't have to get involved in a case that is so highly charged politically, they would love not to get involved. No court.
And not only that, Dean, but they love being above the law, don't they? They love their supreme status, right? They were asked to come up with a code of ethics. Instead, they gave us all a pamphlet of suggestions. I mean, it's absurd and obscene what some of the Supreme Court justices are doing, violating our nation's laws, for example, in the public financial disclosure arena. They love being above the law. the last thing they're going to do is help Donald Trump, an aspiring dictator, take the reins of power again when he has now said, I'll be a dictator on day one. I will terminate the Constitution. There's one thing a dictator has no interest in, Dean. It's a Supreme Court. If they were to, for example, accept review of absolute immunity, which is laughable, and rule that a president is absolutely immune for every crime he commits while in office, Donald Trump would order all of the federal judges whose opinions he disagreed with, order them summarily jailed or worse. Why? Because he couldn't be held accountable for those crimes. Do we really think the Supreme Court is going to do that to themselves?
Right.
No.
And I'm talking with Glenn Kirschner. It's such a great point you make. It's about institutional preservation. The court means nothing. There are 9 people walking around in black robes who have lunch every day, that kind of stuff. Like, that's who they are. There'd be nothing else. Like, what do you guys rule on? Nothing. We just fight over lunch now. That kind of thing. You know, they want mayonnaise. I don't want mayonnaise. Tuna salad every Tuesday. I hate this place. That kind of stuff, because the decisions will be meaningless. And so you're 100% right. And that's what I think that Trump doesn't get. He thinks these guys are loyal to him. They're loyal to keeping their lifestyle, their position, their power. I'm sure they love the power on the Supreme Court. That's a pretty powerful position. So let's talk about I want to get to Judge Chutkan, but I had to get your reaction because GOP House Speaker Mike Johnson, for Speaker for at least a couple more weeks or months, because the House GOP is just falling apart. Kevin McCarthy's leaving at the end of the month. You've got Congressman Johnson, another one, said he's leaving in February. That means the GOP's majority be down to 1 as of then. So they might have a Speaker, Hakeem Jeffries, before this is over. But Mike Johnson yesterday, a lawyer, knows what he's saying about the January 6 tapes, quote, we have to blur some of the faces of persons who participated in the events of that day because we don't want them to be retaliated against or to be charged by the DOJ. So he wants to hide the Trump supporters' faces who DOJ maybe have not seen yet. What is your reaction to this?
Well, I think it's nice that in the holiday spirit, MAGA Mike Johnson is, spreading some aid and comfort to the January 6th insurrectionists. I think that's lovely. It's probably not a chargeable crime. It does feel a lot like accessory after the fact. So first of all, it's not really obstruction of justice. It's ugly, it's unseemly, it's unpatriotic, and it's just a horrific thing to do. But, it's not really obstructing the investigation or the prosecution of the January 6th, boots of the insurrection, because law enforcement has these tapes. They have the evidence available. They're not preventing law enforcement from doing anything. So let's look at the next crime. Is it accessory after the fact? Accessory after the fact says if you know an offense against the United States has been committed by somebody and you do something to assist that person in avoiding apprehension, punishment, accountability, then you are an accessory after the fact to their crime because you're trying to help them get away with it. Is it accessory after the fact? I think there's an academic argument there that because you're blurring the faces, what you're doing is depriving the people who see it from identifying this potential insurrectionist. Here's the thing, Dean. Not everybody who went to the Capitol on January 6th committed crimes, right? Some of them just kind of loitered on Capitol grounds. And if they didn't breach the bike racks, which is all they had up to try to hold back the angry mob, then they probably didn't unlawfully enter federal property. So you can't say that every single person who was caught on camera that day committed a crime or is an insurrectionist. So the devil's always in the evidentiary details as to whether, what Mike Johnson did constitutes the crime of accessory after the fact. The reality is, the reason I say it's an academic discussion, he ain't going to be charged by the Department of Justice for any of it. Unfortunately, DOJ has shown that it doesn't have much of an appetite to hold the members of Congress who were actually insurrectionists, the ones who asked for pardons because they knew they committed crimes on and around January 6th and they want to get away with those crimes. They are continuing to try to kill us from within. DOJ doesn't even seem to have the appetite to go after them. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it's all happening behind the scenes and eventually they will be held accountable, as you shake your head and smile. And I understand why, because we've seen no outward manifestation of any of that.
We screamed for years, you and I, Glenn, howling at the moon for just charges against Trump. And if it wasn't for Jack Smith, I
Yeah.
don't know where we would be. Thank our lucky stars for Jack Smith moving so swiftly and deliberately and without any hesitation whatsoever. He didn't care. He's going after where he saw evidence of crimes. And if he had more time, maybe he'd go after Jim Jordan one day. I think he's probably, and maybe Scott Perry, maybe a couple others, but Jim Jordan the most in the January 6th report. He was talked about more than anybody. So maybe, but right now he went after Trump, and that's what we needed. And we will always wonder, depending how this works out, what if Merrick Garland had moved swiftly? What if he appointed a Jack Smith on his day one in office and these charges and the trial happened a year and a half ago? You know, are we not, we're dealing with a Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis' nominee, but we're not dealing with our democracy on the ballot and really worrying about that. And if we, God forbid, Trump wins, there'll be a lot of finger pointing then. But
Dean, let's be clear. Donald Trump could have been arrested on January 7th for the insurrection. Donald Trump could have been arrested on January 20th after Joe Biden was sworn in for all of the crimes he committed while in office. He was eligible to be arrested, indicted, held accountable for all of those crimes. So just let me take one real quickly. I know we've talked about it before, but the danger of declining to hold a criminal president accountable for bribing and extorting a world leader like President Zelensky, bribing and extorting him by unlawfully withholding congressional funds, our tax dollars, and saying, I need a favor, though. I need you to do a dirty political favor against my opponent. That, I mean, a novice prosecutor could prove that charge in his or her sleep. By declining to hold him accountable for that, we're giving permission to the next corrupt president to do it all over again. And it is mind-blowing to me that we have not held Donald Trump or tried to hold him accountable for the crimes he committed while president. What a horrible precedent to set.
You know, and I had someone who called just a couple of nights ago to remind us about the Mueller report and the different crimes, especially obstruction counts, detailed by Mueller. And we've talked about this before. And I think the statute of limitations may have run on most, if not all of them. I can't be sure now. But there was something that's not talked about at all in the media, which is like, well, the media's like, well, we're going to turn the page because DOJ didn't do anything. The media can't make things happen. They report
and
on
Merrick Garland not prosecuting Donald Trump for all of his crimes while in office, including the as many as 10 felony obstruction of justice counts that were meticulously documented and the evidence preserved by Bob Mueller in Volume 2 of the Trump-Russia report, by Merrick Garland giving Donald Trump a pass on all of that. That's the equivalent of Gerald Ford pardoning Richard Nixon for all of his crimes while in office. I thought we would have learned our damn lesson last time.
You know, the irony is, say they had charged Trump right away for some January 6th crimes. He probably never gets charged for the classified document case because he gives the documents back. He's like, all right, I have enough trouble. Just give the documents back. So those 30 plus violations of the Espionage Act, the obstruction charges, which are very serious, unless Judge Cannon sits at the defense table with the defense team, that Trump will likely be convicted there. That probably never happens because honestly, his lawyers are like, look, you're charged with other stuff. Just give the documents back. Let's not do this. He would have avoided one other big, potentially long prison sentence and headache with that case.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that it just highlights why, you know, if you allow the rule of law to sleep, if you don't assert it as it was intended to be asserted and applied equally to all people, this is what we can expect. We can expect more of Donald Trump and his ilk.
And I'm talking with our friend Glenn Kirschner. You put out a great video, Judge Chutkan, last Friday, handed down an opinion, a really well-reasoned opinion. I went through it. I talked a little bit with Danny Savalas yesterday about it, that Donald rejecting Trump's plea to have all of his 4 criminal charges in the DC case dismissed, essentially claiming he's a king and he's above the law forever. In office, out of office, you could do whatever you want. What stood out for you in that ruling?
Oh my goodness, there is memorable quote after memorable quote about, you know, how being the person who is ultimately responsible for, you know, the faithful execution of the laws does not give somebody license to violate all of those laws. I mean, and, you know, she made the important point, basic though it may be, that Donald Trump is not asking for a fair opportunity to defend against the indictment or against the charges that have been brought against him. He just wants a get out of jail free pass. He doesn't want to have to be held accountable or be made to present a defense against any of these charges. He wants a license to crime. And I don't think the Supreme Court will give him one. I think Judge Chutkan's amazing 48-page opinion is one for the history books. It's the first time a federal court, a federal judge, has ever had to answer the question, does a president have immunity for crimes he commits while in office? And I mean, she cites so many common sense examples of why the answer is, of course, he doesn't have immunity. If Richard Nixon had immunity for the crimes he committed while in office, Gerald Ford would not have had to have pardoned him, which was a horrific decision. Because you know what, Dean? In my 30 years as a prosecutor, you know what I never once told the victim? Never once told the victim, the way we're going to heal you, the way you're going to move past the horrific crime that was committed against you, I'm going to decline to prosecute the perpetrator. Consider yourself healed. That's how we heal a country. That is institutional insanity.
I agree. There were a few things in her opinion I really loved. I believe she quoted from the Federalist Papers at some point, which was good. But to me, sort of what you touched on earlier in our conversation a little before this, deterrence. That was the big thing. Deterrence. And the judge talked about that the prospect of future criminal liability for a president should, quote, encourage the kind of sober reflection that would reinforce rather than defeat important constitutional values. And if the specter of a subsequent prosecution encourages sitting president to reconsider before deciding to act with criminal intent, that is a benefit, not a defect. Boom, exactly. This is what it's about. And we've talked about this nonstop. The criminal justice system, you punish wrongdoing, not to be mean, to punish that person, but to deter that person and others from ever doing the same conduct. If you don't punish them, you're sending a message. What that person did is legal. It's fine. Keep doing it. This is why I think it's such a great thing that she talked about every president will face difficult decisions. Whether to intentionally commit a federal crime should not be one of them.
One of them. Beautiful.
Deterrence is everything.
Memorable quote after memorable quote, really important piece of legal analysis. And I do think it will be quickly affirmed by the DC Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. And again, I don't even, there is literally zero authority supporting the assertion that a president has immunity against being prosecuted for his crimes. There's no statute. There is no case law, no precedent. There is nothing in the Constitution, and they granted immunity elsewhere. So they knew how to grant immunity to somebody if they wanted to, and they didn't. So, I mean, there is no reason beyond politics that the Supreme Court should accept review of this case.
I don't think the votes will be there to accept review. We will find out. The other thing you mentioned, the ridiculous argument of Trump's team that he was acquitted in the impeachment trial. Thus, it's double jeopardy. And acquittal, you're a former federal prosecutor. Acquittal in the federal setting, isn't it unanimous verdict of all the jurors? In Trump's second impeachment, 57 voted to convict him, 43 not to convict him. It was, if 100 U.S. senators had voted to acquit him, I would have said, well, I would have bought the double jeopardy argument, but I would have been like, yeah, there was something wrong there. Actually, even 7 Republicans joined. So if they had their way, the guy would have been convicted. What a laughable, ridiculous defense that was.
Well, not only that, Dean, impeachment is a political endeavor. Right. And a political endeavor, an administrative endeavor, none of that applies to the double jeopardy prohibition. It's only court endeavors. Remember, the impeachment was largely an evidence-free endeavor, right? They wouldn't even let witnesses be subpoenaed and testified, but that is going to have double jeopardy implications. That is just asinine.
And today we learned Jack Smith wants the jury to hear about Donald Trump's prior election lies that go back to 2012 and 2016, talking about elections being stolen. And he wasn't even running in 2012. And in 2016, he actually did win. And so can you explain why they wanted in, and what do you think the value is in terms of being persuasive to a jury?
Yeah, let's start with a quick, I call it Team Justice Law School class of about 1 minute, because this motion is a motion that's filed under the Federal Rule of Evidence 404B. What the heck is that? So the Federal Rule of Evidence 404B says that you can't introduce uncharged misconduct, other bad acts by a defendant to prove that he committed the charged crime. Here's the example. Dean, you and I talk about wanting to rob a bank, and we put a plan in place to rob a bank. My neighbor overhears us hearing about our conspiracy to rob a bank. A week later, you and I go out and rob a bank. But when I learned that my neighbor heard us discussing our conspiracy to rob a bank, I go to my neighbor's house and I whoop the you-know-what out of him. And I said, you better not tell anybody that you overheard Dean and I talking about robbing a bank. Okay, now you and I get locked up for bank robbery. We're indicted. We're in trial. Me beating up my neighbor is not a charged offense. I'm not charged with assault. However, it's conduct that's relevant to the charged offense. Why? Because I was motivated to beat him up because I didn't want anybody to find out you and I robbed the bank. That is the concept of uncharged misconduct that is admissible to prove the charged misconduct, to prove knowledge, intent, motive, plan, absence of mistake or accident, common scheme, et cetera, et cetera. So what Jack Smith has done is said, look, there's all this other stuff that Donald Trump talked about that's really bad. It's not necessarily part of the 4 charged crimes, but it's relevant to his intent, his knowledge, his motive, his common scheme or plan. So we want to bring in all the bad stuff he was saying back in 2012. We want to bring in bad stuff he was saying well after the January 6th insurrection because it bears on his intent, his knowledge, his common plan or scheme. But there's an even more important evidentiary nugget that was in that 9-page pleading by Jack Smith. And it has to do with something I don't think we knew about before. Out in Detroit on November 4, 2020, when they were counting the votes and the votes started trending to Joe Biden as the winner, there was a Donald Trump, and here is the money word, co-conspirator. That's how he's identified in this new filing by Jack Smith. A Donald Trump campaign employee who is a Trump co-conspirator who starts texting with another Trump supporter who was an attorney who was part of the feet on the ground campaign election operation in Detroit on November 4th. And because it starts trending in favor of Joe Biden, these 2 individuals are texting back and forth. Okay, we need to start a riot at the TCF Center in Detroit so we can delay the vote count. Here's why that information is so important, Dean. Because people might say, well, neither of those text messages originated with Donald Trump, so how can you hold them against Donald Trump? The fact that one of the 2 people texting back and forth about starting a riot in Detroit to stop the vote count was a co-conspirator, those statements are directly admissible against Donald Trump, provided they were made during the course of and in furtherance of the conspiracy. That's the hurdle for admissibility. So those text messages will be given to the jury, and they're going to be told, you can use this as incriminating evidence against Donald Trump, that his co-conspirator was out there trying to, quote, start a riot to stop the count because it looked like Joe Biden was going to win. We hadn't heard that before. That was a really important incriminating nugget that we got in that new Jack Smith court filing.
And I also appreciate your explanation of Federal Rule 404 in terms of Federal Rule of Evidence, because Danny Savalas, who comes on every week, has bemoaned how prosecutors, because he's a practicing defense attorney, have been able to get so many bad acts of his clients into a court because they're like, we're not introducing it to show he's guilty of this or for the actual truth of the matter, that kind of stuff. Like, we're just doing it for some other reason. And he goes, everything always comes in, and he goes, it is so damning to people. And
yeah, Danny bemoans the fact that people are being held accountable for these crimes in accordance with the rules. I celebrate it. We come at this question from 2 different perspectives, and I love and respect and admire Danny and his commentary.
No, it's funny because I brought you up. I told him yesterday that Glenn's on today to counter all of this BS that you're peddling, your defense bar dreams of everyone walks free. So, by the way, you mentioned the jury notice is going out, and it looks like it is the one for the Judge Chutkan case in D.C. with Donald Trump charged with 4 felonies. You know, how hard will it be? Because I saw that in the notice is 3 months anticipated trial. How hard is it to get a jury in DC where you practiced that will be fair, impartial, and has 3 months to spend?
Yeah, the fair and impartial part is generally not that hard, and I'll talk about why that is in a minute. The 3 months part can be a challenge because, you know, it's a real imposition. Yes, it's a civic responsibility and duty, and I suggest it's actually a high honor to serve as a juror. I mean, it's a weighty responsibility to pass judgment on a fellow member of your community as to whether they should be held accountable for a crime or not. I prosecuted a 6-month RICO trial. We had to impanel a jury. I prosecuted a 3-month RICO trial. We had to impanel a jury. And often what ends up happening is there are lots and lots and lots of federal government employees, not surprisingly, in Washington, D.C. And these people are kind of, ready-made to set their federal job aside to fulfill the equally important federal responsibility of being a juror in a federal case. So lots of federal employees. We get lots of postal workers. We get bus drivers. We get folks who are maybe homemakers, whether they're men or women. We get folks who are not employed, so they have a lot of time on their hands. So it's not as difficult as it might sound to find jurors who can actually sit for 3 to 6 months, because they do get to self-select. If they say to the judge, this would be an extreme hardship for me in my professional work in my personal life, I have medical appointments, I have childcare obligations, then the judge will dismiss those people, right? So, and when it comes to picking a fair and impartial jury, once you overcome the hardship hurdle and these people can sit for 3 months, voir dire, that is jury selection, is a pretty probing process. The prosecutors and the defense attorneys and the judges are all kind of intensely questioning this juror, every juror, one-on-one. And we try to determine whether they're the kind of person who has it in them to sit fairly and impartially and decide the case based only on the evidence that's presented in court during the course of the trial and nothing else, none of their preconceived notions based on what they might have heard or learned about the insurrection, none of their politics, none of their ideology, none of their biases or prejudices, none of it. And, I've been involved in a lot of jury selections because I never did leave the trial court. In my 30 years, I was a trial court prosecutor. I never wanted to climb the bureaucratic ladder of success at DOJ. Some might say I wasn't capable of climbing the bureaucratic ladder of success at DOJ. But it's a process that does a pretty darn good job of weeding out people who can't be fair and impartial for some reason. Add on top of that, Dean, the internet, because somebody could come in and say, I don't have any political preferences or biases or strong beliefs about ideology. Then you go online and they're like, MAGA, MAGA, MAGA. Or they're like, I hate Trump, I hate Trump. And okay, no, you can't sit fairly and impartially. And we caught you trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the judge and the prosecutor and the defense attorney. We will seat a fair and impartial jury to hear the evidence and to convict Donald Trump so fast it will make his head spin because of the quality and quantity of evidence against him.
Being a patriotic American, I'm ready to serve on that jury. I just want people to know, and I would be fair. And you can look, what? Here's the weird thing. No one believes me, but I've been sincere about this because in New York, I'm about to get called for jury duty because they got the questionnaire first. So any day now, last time I served was about 6 years ago. So any day, if I got called on the Trump hush money case, like I couldn't do 2 or 3 months. I would lose my I would lose my show. It's not possible. But if I'm not even kidding. Like if Trump was charged and I was in the jury, and I'm not joking whatsoever, if the elements of the crime were not proved, I'd be the first to go like, nope, sorry. I hope they get him in the other cases, but it's not here. And I don't have any problem. And people don't believe me, but I believe in the system. And if you're going to believe in the system, you have to be honest within this system, or it is a rigged partisan witch hunting BS where you put away your political opponents in jail. I will never do that. I would argue with the other jurors. Nope, it's not there. I'm not kidding.
Dean, I am 100% with you, not just because we are both technically officers of the court as lawyers, but as a career prosecutor, I could absolutely serve fairly and impartially on any jury in any criminal case. Why? Because I would need the prosecution to prove to me, every element of every crime beyond a reasonable doubt before I'm ever voting guilty. Now, the flip side of the coin is I probably wouldn't be snowed by defense BS, but I also wouldn't be snowed by prosecution BS. So I'm with you. I could absolutely serve as a fair and impartial jury, but I don't think there's a defense attorney in the world that would leave me on the jury.
No, cut to me in the Trump jury and they begin opening statements and I stand up, I go, guilty. That's the guy that did it right there. We're done, folks. Wrap it up. And then, well, Glenn, we had other topics, but it was great chatting with you on this stuff. I always learn a lot. And follow Glenn. What's the best place? YouTube? Do you like to go to X? Threads? You're everywhere. What do you prefer?
Yeah, I'm on X and Threads, but YouTube, Justice Matters with Glenn Kirschner is the place where they can see my daily legal analysis videos. I would say I never tell anybody to subscribe, but you might as well subscribe while you're there because it's always free, right?
Right.
And it does help. So that's where you can see my daily legal analysis, as well as on MSNBC. I just finished a hit. I've got 2 more hits coming up, one with Joy Reid and one with Lawrence O'Donnell today. So I keep busy on TV. And then if anybody really wants to join Team Justice Proper and, partake in the democracy, fight that we are engaged in, they can go over to patreon.com, sign up to become a patron, and then they get all kinds of behind the scenes stuff. And I send them out stickers and notes and all sorts of fun stuff. So at Patreon, that's where you can really plug into Team Justice.
You do. And Glenn has a big dinner every year, which I went to in DC this year, and I spoke for a few minutes, told a few jokes.
And we're coming to New York in January, Dean. I have to talk about the we're going to do a Team Justice happy hour, drinks and appetizers on me. It's going to be probably the second week in January, and I need your help picking a venue where we can fit about 25 to 50 people in there.
Sure. We'll talk offline. I'm happy to help. I'm happy to be there. I'll take off from the show to be there. Glenn, thanks so much, my friend. And Merry Christmas to you if I don't talk to you in the next couple of weeks. I'm away next week. I probably won't. Happy New Year, and I look forward to chatting with you in the new year.
You too, Dean.